Hello, how
Hey,
are
what's
you?
happening in here?
She did that, so I left
Oh,
it.
bless her.
So I left it. I kind of like it, but I didn't know what was going on, so.
It's good. It is what it is. Jody, you need to come earlier so I can feed you for these events.
Do you want to leave it like this? Or
Yeah, fuck it. Why would we move it?
Your bag.
Oh, fuck it. Was that your laptop bag?
Sounded like it.
Okay. It is. Do you have your stuff hooked up, Jody, or do you need me to hook up mine?
For what?
Presentation.
No, I had the presentation on mine to show on live, so unless you, oh, wait, no, for you to show the, yes, to show these
Stats
people,
and
yes.
stuff?
Yeah.
Can we get a higher chair and then the box with the thing so I can hook my laptop to the TV? Yep, thank you, sweetie. Yes. Hi. Long time no see. Yes. Hi.
You don't have it on the job, eh?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Jody, I want you to come early so I can feed you. How's your motor doing?
Good, surgery's in July.
So, do you know Joanne Burns?
This guy?
Name sounds familiar.
welcome to, are we recording yet, Jody?
We're good.
Okay. So welcome to the Annapolis Valley Investor Meetup. This is a meetup that was created, there was one, I did one in the city for a little bit, we stopped, then another one started in the city, and then I decided to start this one down here because investing in real estate is regionalized, so depending on where you live, the investing and the different ways of doing things can be a little bit different, especially when it comes to financing. So on today's agenda, I'm very excited. Mark or Jonathan will have a market update. I don't think JB will make it for the market update.
I thought it.
And we also have Cameron McGinnis, who's here from Chicago Title. Is that the right way to say it? Right? You're Chicago Title, you're not FNF anymore? Okay, just making sure. And basically, tonight I wanted to share my experience with. Oh, and that's like repeating back. I'm like, Laura, what are you doing on your phone? That's all right. That's all good. Okay, it's just, you know, when you're talking to somebody and they're in their car and you can hear yourself, I'm like, what is going on? So first and foremost, we always get ready with our market update. We talk about what's going on in the valley. These guys are fantastic. They prepare a presentation. And so I'm going to do that first. I'll give you a lending update and then I'm going to introduce Cameron because I think you're going to find what he has to say very interesting. Okay, come on. Okay.
Thanks, Liam. So for those that don't know me, I'm Mark Marin. I'm with the Benedict Real Estate Group, and I'm a realtor there. I've been a few years now. Just a basic Valley update. We're still growing. Our listings have come up in number, which it's starting to slow, but we're still year over year, more inventory on the market, more sales dollars on the market though too. As you can see, we are up. You know, it's not the big jumps that we were used to from 2020 to 2021, 2021 to 2022, but we are still climbing. We're still in a positive swing, which a lot of the country isn't. The amount of V1 is basically Hansport to Mount Uniacke to about Hansport area. Our listings are low. We have no inventory on the market. We don't have as many listings, and they're just gone. Like, we don't see anything lasting like it was. We've still got a low amount of days on market. We're almost comparable to last year when it was still the peak. But we do have a little more inventory, which is nice to see. It's just they're selling as fast as they're hitting the market. You can see here again, we're up about $9,000, so a few percent year over year from last April. These are the April stats. May has been a much stronger month, but we won't have the final stats until next week. May has been tremendous. It's been another great growth month. V2, so that's Hansport to Aylesford area, also picking up, following a similar trend. We're still seeing, you know, sales may be down, but dollar value's up, inventory's a little up, and days on market has climbed a little, as it was comparable with the V1 area. And again, another jump in price. So year over year, we're still seeing an increase dollar value on your sales dollars. So, you know, people that bought last year can sell this year for a little bit more. At the end of the day, you're typically not going to buy a house to sell it a year later, but it is nice to see the growth still showing up. So, any questions on the current state of events in the market, or state of affairs in the market?
No
Cool.
questions.
We are growing. We are still seeing higher sales dollars, but we're starting to see a bit more inventory. Is the take home. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm like Cam. I don't prepare a presentation around lending, but I will give you guys a little bit of an update. So I get a lot of people calling me saying, can I get in to see you by June 6th or 7th, whatever the next date is for the rate change, because I want to lock in my rate. The rates that are being moved at those times with the Bank of Canada, those are variable rates. those have nothing to do with the 5-year fixed. So 5-year fixed rates, we have been seeing a steady downward trend, and now that we're into spring market, we are slowly seeing it go up, and we see it every year. We see it every year this time of year. Last year or 2 years ago when we were seeing it, it was like, you know, you were going from 1.65 to 1.99 on your 5-year fix. Now we're seeing it go from 4.54 to 4.89 on a 5-year fix. In my opinion, anything sub 5% on a house is a fabulous rate. If you end up going into your mortgage this time of year at these rates, I'm actually coaching people to either do lines of credit and or only take a 3-year. So if you're gonna be buying something, a 3-year is a better way to go. Cuts our pays down, but in my opinion, you should always have an opportunity when rates are up to improve that rate. Could I be screwing people over by putting them in a 3-year now, and you know, 3 years from now it could be 8%, I don't know, but we want that opportunity to improve on that for people. So I am getting a lot of emails right now saying I need to get in, I need to lock down my rate, rates are going up. We don't know, there's no crystal ball, there's no way to tell, like, you know, we have this forest fire burning in Halifax right now, so we don't know what's gonna affect things and cost of living and all that stuff. But we do know that, you know, sub 5% is still a great rate to borrow money. If you have 20% down, it will of course help you save your CMHC fees and all that good stuff. And yeah, we're still lending money, we're still going crazy. I'm still tracking for the same volume that I did last year. Maybe my business is more refi than it is purchase, but it's still crazy busy. I'm seeing about 15 people a day, every half hour, figuring out, you know, refinances and purchases and pre-approvals and all that stuff. So it's still bonkers out there. So I'm gonna share with you. So Cameron, I'll introduce you in a second. I'll read from this paper or whatever, but I want to share a story. So when I bought my home in 2010, I bought it privately. And when I bought it privately, I bought it off of a woman, and her husband had built the home. They had done a self-build, okay? And when we bought it, the house was 6 years old. So we were buying it privately from her. So why would you do an inspection? 6 years old, it's already really been inspected by the town. Everything should be up to code. Big mistake, okay? That's mistake number 1. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake because it ended up working out in my favor in the end. Only because of him. And so when we got into the home, the house, when we initially bought it, the baseboards were never put on, but they were all in the basement. The windows were not finished, but all the stuff was in the basement. There was flooring to be put down in different rooms, but all the supplies were there. The day of closing, that all disappeared. She sold it all. So we moved in and we had to go buy everything, whatever. That following summer, I was working with Manulife Bank at the time. That following summer, when you walked into our house, our kitchen was there, and then we had a window, right? And to go out to the deck, you had to go all the way down to the end of the house. So we decided we were going to take out that window and put in a door. And when we took that window out, and we started to cut things down to do the door, and we were also replacing the deck, we learned that our back deck and everything that was in that window, the whole back of the house was mold. Complete mold. So we just didn't even think anything of it. And as it happened, that night we went to dinner at Il Mercato in Bedford. This is like 12 years ago now. And so I'm talking to one of my colleagues, and I say to my colleague, you know, I was talking about my house. And the president of F&F at the time, they do title insurance, leaned in and she was like, what was her name again? Rebecca?
No.
I can't remember her name.
It'll come to
Anyway,
me.
it's irrelevant. But anyway, she leaned in and she's like, what happened? And I said, well, we bought our house and then we just started into renovations and we discovered that there's a ton of mold. And she said, that's covered by title insurance, because if your work is done properly, you don't end up with these problems. So title insurance, okay. So I always knew lenders had title insurance, but I didn't know clients got title insurance. So he leans in and he goes, who closed your house? And I said, Trevor Hughes and Windsor. You definitely have title insurance. I can guarantee it. I'll get you your certificate number tomorrow. Sure enough, sent me my certificate number. And what title insurance does for people is if you buy a house and you run into problems, and those problems were created by the former owner not doing the work properly, and you can prove that, that's another key, title insurance will pay to fix your house. Likewise, if you buy a house, I have a girlfriend that bought a house in Sackville, 3 units, in an R2 zone. The realtor never caught it, the lawyer never caught it, she had title, come on girl. The title, nobody caught it, and title insurance, so somebody had called HRM to say to her, you can only have 2 units, so she had to pay to remove one of the units. Title insurance would cover that. So the reason I tell you my story is that I never knew that this existed, so I've been telling people about it ever since. It's probably not great for them guys for claims and stuff. Many people won't do a claim, they just think that it's not something that they'll be covered for or whatever. But I had a successful claim myself. I did have a couple of other clients that I helped. I had one client who bought a house, and it was a beautiful house over on Windsor Back Road. Old house, like 100 years old, and it had a kitchen built on the back with like a slant roof. And his kitchen floor was like this in the middle. The deal was closed with one realtor, no inspection, 3 weeks with a first-time home buyer. The realtor double-ended the deal. That's another no-no that you should have. His title insurance claim was paid. It was $180,000, by the way, to fix the house. This is not something that your homeowner's insurance will cover, nothing. So I share that story because I think it's really important that people know what's out there, what help is out there, and if it's done the right way, that you can recover costs from work that was done incorrectly, okay? So I'm gonna read Cam's introduction here. A seasoned sales professional, Cameron has over 19 years of experience. He looks like he's 20, but anyway. In the title insurance industry. Previous to the title insurance industry, he was a lender with the Bank of Montreal in Halifax and assistant branch manager with the National Bank in New Brunswick. In 2010, Cameron started with Chicago Title, where he has been instrumental in building relationships in Atlantic Canada with lawyers, paralegals, and their firms. A great listener, he has the ability to connect with people on a professional and personal level. He is passionate about assisting law firms to close their real estate transactions and to build their business. Product knowledge, customer service, and making each client feel like they are his only client has been the key to building his successful market. Through education and training programs on title insurance and real estate, he's always there to help and support client growth. I can attest to this. Originally from a small town in New Brunswick, Cameron now lives in Bedford, Nova Scotia with his wife and 2 boys. He volunteers his time as a coach with the Bedford Minor Hockey, and in 2023 joined the board of directors with Urban Development Institute in Halifax. So, Cameron, I would like for you to come up and talk to us about title insurance. It's a very little known thing that people have. They have no idea what they have, and if it wasn't for him, I would be out $22,000 to fix my house.
All right, well, thanks for the introduction.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. I'm going to try to. Title insurance is so much information about it, so we're going to take about the next 20 minutes here, and I'm going to just try to instill some information for you. It will really just be the tip of the iceberg, to be quite honest with you on that. But at least it will be that kind of information that you can take forward. You can talk to your lawyers and so forth about it, and we're going to go through some of that information. And I'll definitely stick around here for a little bit afterwards if you guys want to talk a bit more about title insurance. So the first thing I'm going to start to talk to you about is, many of you may have heard about this in the media a lot lately, which is about fraud. And I know we live in Nova Scotia, particularly in Windsor, and we think, you know what is going to possibly ever happen here in little old Windsor for fraud? And I'm here to tell you, it's knock on wood, we have not paid out a claim yet, fraud related in the province, but it's a matter of time. And so the story I wanted to share with you was it was a client of ours who owned a property that they were renting out. They actually owned a condo that they were renting out. And so the person who was renting out the condo from them decided to create fraudulent ID and became the owner of the condo, phoned up a private lender, had them come over to the condo unit, meet with them in person, did the mortgage, went through the whole process, hired a lawyer, got the money, and walked away, in this particular situation, walked away with close to $1 million. Now, There's not a lot of properties here that are being rented out that are $1 million properties, but I mean, if you get a 4-unit, 5-unit building, there's always that possibility, even down here through the valley. So these are some of the types of things that we're really starting to get in at, and now a lot of people are talking about fraud and how do you protect yourself from real estate fraud when it happens to you. People have access to property online where they can find out who the owner is of the property, who the lender is on the property. I mean, you can go find that information
I
out.
can go see the signed documents.
You can find the signed documents, the whole bit, so now they know what your signature is, who you're lending with, and know all of this information, and they can do things that are just not very nice. So, with having said that, I'm gonna transition here into a little bit about what we're really gonna talk about, which is what is title insurance. And then we're gonna talk about the common coverages that title insurance has, even beyond the whole fraud side of things. And then I'll just let you know exactly how do you get it, how do you get the coverage for your properties. So, one of the things that's really interesting to know about title insurance is, first off, when you buy a property, just by a quick show of hands, what I wanna know is, I got 3 questions for you. How would you like to reduce your closing costs? Okay. Closing costs. And how would you like to increase the likelihood that your purchase is actually gonna close on time, or even your refinance for that matter? And one more question, again by a show of hands. How would you like to sleep better at night, knowing that you have this protection there in the event that something does happen, or, right? So that's what we're gonna focus on today. So we're gonna come out of this evening, I guess now.
Yep.
With that information, with that knowledge of how you can do that, how you can save some of those costs, how you can sleep better at night, and how you can get those transactions to close a little bit faster and more efficiently. Particularly if you're getting involved with something like a rental unit or something like that, investment property. You don't wanna have these hang-ups and hold-ups, you wanna be able to close it so you can start renting out. Take your money, right? All that kind of stuff. So let's start out with trying to get a bit of an understanding of what title insurance is. Again, it's a bit of a high overview of what it is, because I could probably be here all night just really talking about what title insurance is. Just to give you an idea, our policies, for example, have over 30 different heads of coverage on it. We're not gonna talk about all 30 different coverages within that policy. But ultimately what title insurance does is it insures against unknown defects that happen prior to you becoming the owner of that particular property. And so, what is a defect? So it'd be things like unknown easements, right-of-ways, any judgments, liens, work orders, outstanding building permits, those types of things that even though your lawyer's going through and they're searching this information and they're pulling out whatever they can find, the challenge becomes is that they can't find it. So for example, in Leanne's situation and others, where we've insured people because there was a outstanding work order or lack of building permits to do work on a property before you purchase the property, a lawyer can go and do those searches for work orders. All it's going to tell them is, are they existent or non-existent? And so if they're non-existent, you still don't know if the previous homeowner did any work to that property before you actually bought the property. I mean, how many times, as a realtor, maybe you've seen this a fair bit, Mark, where how many times you hear about newly renovated kitchen, right? I remember years ago, there was a claim up in Quebec where this person bought a house and it did say newly renovated kitchen in it. And so they bought the house, they're living in it, things are great, and winter comes along and they can't heat it. There's no hot air coming out of the forced air vents, and they can't figure out what's going on. So they're checking the kids' you know, the vents on the floor, see, you know, is there something stuffed down there, is there something jamming it? They had people coming in and checking the furnace, and the furnace was working perfectly fine, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And one day, by chance, the property owner was actually speaking with a neighbor down the street who said, yeah, no, I helped the previous owner renovate the kitchen. What they did is they knocked out a wall that carried the ventilation for the hot air, and they just capped it off. Because they wanted to have open concept. And so they just completely removed the wall and capped it off. And so by the time we got through it all and figured out what was really going on, it was approximately, I'm gonna say, maybe about $50,000 to $60,000 worth of work that actually needed to be done on the property because the previous owner didn't get the proper building permits to do the work on the property. Now, we don't insure over poor work. You know, if they got the permits, they did the work or what have you, sorry for your luck, but that part we don't cover off crappy work, unfortunately. And of course, as I mentioned to you before, title insurance also insures for fraud, right? So that fraud can happen after you actually buy the property. It's one of the few things that we actually cover off, where it can insure you against something that happens to you in the future, whereas everything else is really just coverage. It's already happened before you bought the property.
It can happen too after you own, if you have a property that's free and clear.
What's that?
Fraud,
Fraud.
yes.
Fraud in anything,
Yeah.
right? So if you buy a property today, and 10 years from now, someone commits the fraud on your property, and so, we've seen this time and time again right now, where people will actually sell someone's house without them even knowing it. You get some of these
There's a
properties.
market, JB.
Yeah.
I've been to that one.
We've seen situations where people will be, maybe they go back to, you know, wherever their home is, and maybe, you know, wherever their country is, China or somewhere in Europe or wherever, maybe they have it as a summer home that they come up here in the summers and they're gone in the winters or what have you, because it's an empty house and nobody knows. And so they'll just create a fraudulent listing. They'll gain access to MLS. I mean, you think of Viewpoint as an example, a lot of the fraudsters will know what's listed, what's not listed. They'll scope out properties, they'll find out exactly what's going on, and then they'll all of a sudden become the buyer of the property and create fraudulent purchase and sales and all kinds of stuff. So it's pretty nasty with what's going on out there right now. I mean, the worst of it is really in sort of the Toronto area. Vancouver's really bad right now. Calgary's getting bad. We're seeing signs in Montreal as well. Now, we stay very close connected to the OBP and the RCMP up in Ontario. And so one of the things we did find out last year is there have been some people that they've been watching really closely on that side of it, who've been traveling throughout Atlantic Canada over the last summer. So we know they're around, we know they're scoping out the place at the very least at this stage of the game. But the other part on the fraud side that we always have to keep in mind is it's not just the professional fraudster you often need to worry about, it's the person that you know. It's the family member, it's the friend. There's a claim years ago where a local bank knew the husband extremely well. He goes in, refinances the property, spouse comes in, she signs off on the documents, and about 6 months later, the mortgage is in arrears at this point. The bank is now calling, they finally get the wife on the phone, and she says, I don't have a mortgage with you guys. My husband left me 6 months ago. He walks into the lending institution, walks into the law firm with his girlfriend, which nobody knew. They just assumed that she was the wife, so she signed off as the wife, and then they walked away with, I think in that case, around $400,000 or $500,000.
Do you have were you privy to the one, my girlfriend, her husband hired a hooker to go in at the Fairstone in Sackville?
Don't think I know that one.
Okay, so I have a girlfriend, her husband was a gambling addict, he had 2 profiles, come on in, He had 2 profiles on his credit, and he knew how to get the right credit bureau out so it wouldn't show. And he literally went in and took a $68,000 Fairstone loan. Come on, $68,000 Fairstone. And he hired a hooker that looked like her to sign the documents, and then she went to get a second mortgage on her house to get a business loan,
Yeah.
and found out that the mortgage was there.
Yeah.
Thank God for title insurance.
So that's the hard part about fraud is people will get into bad situations and try to find ways to get out. So we just never know when that's going to happen. So that's really the only way that you can protect yourself from those types of scenarios that are happening. So what title insurance does not cover off is, it's not a property insurance, it's not covering property damage. It's not covering things like wear and tear on your property. So again, if we go back to the coverage that we were talking about before, where there's, if there was all the permits and everything else was all put in place, it's just that, the house is now 60 years old, and it's wearing, you have to replace the windows. Well, you have to replace the windows because they were put in properly at the time, and they had all the permits and everything else was fine. So it's not any kind of wear and tear, that type of stuff. It doesn't cover fences or boundary walls, any kind of bushes or trees that kind of cover your boundary lines. Even though we do insure over whatever an up-to-date survey would actually reveal, so you don't really need to get a survey or a location certificate. The only time I really suggest that you get a survey or location certificate is if you're planning on building on the property, because if you can't build on it because the property is too small, we don't insure over that either. Because the one thing that we have to always keep in mind about title insurance is, if there's a claim that comes in, one of the first questions we always have to ask is the client incurring some kind of a loss? And whether that's legal fees to fix the situation, or, as in Leanne's case, actually physically fixing whatever needs to be repaired to the property, or maybe we had to move a shed, off the property line, or, a driveway as an example. Maybe the driveway was going in the wrong direction and going over someone's property and really should be coming in from a different way. So things like that. So the other thing it doesn't cover off is, even though we do cover well and septic, one thing to keep in mind is well is only covered for the lender, that's it. And septic, there is some coverage, but it's not coverage if the septic system just breaks down, like it's old, it's worn. Where our coverage comes in for the septic system is if somebody didn't actually get the permits to install the septic system. I remember years ago there was one that came in, someone decided to use a Volkswagen Bug for their septic tank. Clearly they didn't have the permits to install that. So we actually did cover that off, but it's all that's permit related, as opposed to they properly installed it, they had the permits, all that kind of stuff. It's just getting old now and worn down and breaks down, because those things happen. So there are different types of title insurance that you have to really keep in mind as well. We have both residential and commercial policies. Residential for us is anything with 6 units or less. So if you're buying an investment property and people are living in it, as long as there's 6 units or less in it, we can still consider that as a residential. Even if the lending institution, even if Leanne's looking at a deal for you, it has to consider it commercial from a lending purpose.
Yeah.
For us, it doesn't matter. We can still do it as 6 units. The good news about that is we can actually save you a little bit of money, because commercial starts to get a little bit more expensive once we get into the commercial side of things. What determines commercial for us is once we get into, once we hit the 7th unit, that starts to be commercial for us. If there's any commercial component to the property, even if you have like a house, for example, but someone's running a business out of it, then we still have to run it as a commercial transaction, because they're running a business. It's not being used as a residential home. So the purpose of that matters. Acreage sometimes matters. So for example, you might have somebody who has a small hobby farm, And if it's, as long as it's under 10 acres and they're not making income off of it, then we can consider that as a residential. Whereas once we get over the 10 acres or they start earning money off of that, then we would have to consider that as a commercial policy. The other key component to the policies to remember is there's both a lender and an owner policy. And that's really key to remember. In Truro, probably about 4 years ago, I think it was, there was a client who purchased the property. It was through a lender. It was a foreclosure sale from the lender. And so the client buys the property, they get title insurance, they move into the property, and like about a week after they move into the property, the former homeowner that lived there, that had the house foreclosed on them, comes knocking on the door and says, "I'll sell you the backyard." And so, of course, the homeowner's going, "What do you
That made
sell
the
me the
news, right?
backyard?"
Yeah.
It did make the news.
That made the news, yeah.
So it made the news. So he goes back to his lawyer and says, "What's going on?" And so the lawyer looks into it and goes, "Oh, look at that." Sure enough, the lender only had priority on the house, and the property consisted of multiple PIDs, right? And so PIDs is what we use to describe the property and so forth. And so, because they didn't have the PID on the backyard, it didn't go through as part of the sale of this property. So now they go to make a claim through title insurance, because as I mentioned earlier, they bought a title insurance policy. Now, it wasn't covered through us, but we probably would have said the exact same thing that this title insurer said, which was no coverage. And the reason why there was no coverage is they only bought a lender policy. And so since the mortgage was being paid, the lender didn't have a claim, they didn't have any issue, not incurring a loss. So unfortunately, the title insurer in that situation wouldn't have been able to help that client. Now, we took it an extra step further to look at it and say, would we have covered it if there was a homeowner policy included in there? And in their situation, because there was a shed in the backyard and the deck was over on that extra PID, we would have actually covered that off.
So
And
that's a lawyer not using title insurance.
not using it properly, and because they divide title insurance on it, but they only bought title insurance to cover the lender,
Not for the client.
not for the client. And so it's really important to make sure that because there is a difference there, right?
Well, I didn't know I had title insurance until you told me,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So always keep that in mind. So when you're talking to your lawyers and you're buying you're buying a real estate property, make sure you're letting them know that you wanna get the owner and the lender. Fortunately, most lawyers in the province that I deal with are buying both policies anyway.
And they're cheap, guys. They're like super cheap.
Yeah, I mean, on a residential, the difference between buying a lender only and buying a lender and an owner policy is $50. So,
Right?
we're not
Like
talking
it's
big
not,
money,
it's not,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's,
My title policy, I think, was $180, and that was back in 2011.
yeah, a lot of the policies will range usually anywhere from, on a residential, from around $200 to $500 for both
Once.
the lender and owner.
Once when you close.
It's a one,
Not
yeah.
monthly, not annually,
Yeah.
once.
Yeah, it's a one-time premium, there's no, and there's no deductible if you go to make a claim. So it's a pretty simple
Yeah,
policy when.
low
when you
cost
look at
for
it.
high reward if you need to claim it.
Now, we don't claim to cover every single little thing that's there with your property. That's part of the reason why it is fairly inexpensive. And we're also counting on the fact that not every single property in the province is gonna have a claim on it. Because we're hoping that the lawyers are doing their jobs, that the realtors are doing their jobs, and lenders are doing their jobs, and all that kind of stuff. And when we put all that together, but we still know that there is still that little bit of risk. And at the end of the day, do you wanna be the homeowner that has that one property that has the issue on it, right? So in some ways, it's almost like a bit of Russian roulette, right? Where you're just kind of, so in order to avoid that risk, then get title insurance, and you just don't have to worry about it anymore. It just takes away a lot of those other worries.
The reason that mine was paid was the person pulled out permits. The permits were signed off, but nobody ever issued an occupancy permit. And there were defects listed on a conditional occupancy permit, meaning that the work was never signed off. title insurance paid.
Yeah, so the one thing to keep in mind when you go through a claim like that, like, so for Leanne's is a really good example of where title insurance does come into play and how it all works. You know, if a homeowner just comes back to us and says, you know, my deck's falling off the back of my house, and, you know, and I don't think the
It was
previous
put on
homeowners-
properly,
I
yeah.
don't think it was put on properly, and I don't think the homeowners previous to me got the building permits to do it. What we need from the homeowner at that point is some kind of communication from the local government municipality or what have you, to say, no, there was no permits for this, and you need to replace it. Because you have to be put in a situation where you're being forced to fix or remedy that. Now, I mean, if it's really falling off, then maybe that's a little bit of a different story, but typically speaking, you know, we want those kind of letters, communication coming in from the municipality to understand that there was no building permits issued. Otherwise, we don't know if there was a building permit issued or not, and because if there was, there's no coverage, so we have to confirm that to make sure that that's the case, so.
And mine were issued, but they didn't sign it off.
But they weren't signed off and they weren't closed, so that was the issue there with that one. So I'm just gonna go through a couple claim scenarios for you, some of the different coverages that are there. So, one really good example, so we have a coverage, I'm not gonna go into too much detail about the coverage, but we have a coverage, it's called it's transaction protection endorsement, which covers off any errors or omissions that the lawyer might make on the vendor side or the purchasing side of the transaction. And so this particular claim, which happened, was just outside Halifax, that this one happened. The client purchased the property, the lawyer closes on the deal, and when he reviews the purchase and sale agreement, it says that the property has 2 in-law suites and a bunkhouse on the property. So the lawyer's now looking at this deal, there's no rental agreements in place, his client's not looking to do any rental with the property whatsoever. So he's looking at the property, he says, okay, well, you can have multiple in-law suites, there's no issue with that. And you can have a bunkhouse on your property. I don't know about you guys, but I think of a bunkhouse, I think of a shed with a bed in it.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, it's a pretty simple definition of it, but that's basically what you're getting into. After closing, the municipality issued a letter to the homeowner saying that your property is zoned R2, which means you can have 2 units, but you have 2 houses on the same PID. In HRM at the time, you could only have 1. Now you can have 2, but at this time this happened, you could only have the 1. And your main house, your main property has 3 units in it. So you have to get rid of the second house, and you have to get rid of at least one of those units in the property. And so as we started to investigate this a little bit further, what we learned was the 2 in-law suites both had a kitchen and a bathroom in it, which now actually makes it a rentable unit. The bunkhouse was built on a cement slab, running water, electricity, a kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom, like, for all intents and purposes, it was a small house. And so, once we started to look at all of that, we were able to say to the lawyer, because you reviewed the purchase and sale agreement and made an error within your own opinion on title based on the documentation that you had received and that you had reviewed, we provided full coverage for the client in that situation. Now that one actually got a little bit ugly, because once we started to look at the bunkhouse, because we had to determine whether we could move it or we could change it and alter it to keep it. We also found out that it was built over a water system, so now we had to actually get an environmental done through the province, and that just opened up a whole other can of worms. So at the end of the day, client probably paid about, say $350 for their title insurance policy, and we probably ended up showing out around $60,000 to $90,000 worth just to fix it. Now, that also gives us the right to be able to go and sue the previous homeowners to try and recoup some of our losses. But as a homeowner, you don't want to get bogged down in that. You don't want to have to go after the previous homeowner and try and sue them. Maybe you get something back, maybe you don't, but you don't really want to have to get involved with all that stuff, right? So
Cameron's actually helping a friend of mine right now who bought a home in Falmouth. And the home was moved from the valley and placed on a foundation here. They bought it as a 9-year-old home, but her windows are like 30 years old and her fans are like 30 years old in the house. JB's ears perked up because he knows the house. They also wanted to do some renovations, so they took the wood off of the extensions in the basements that are holding like the whole house up. And there were supposed to be 6 pillars, and now there's 4. And they're trying to get the municipality to tell them that it needs to be 6, but the municipality won't tell them that they need to fix it because
Yeah.
that'll make them liable. And anyway, so Cameron's helping her with her plan.
Yeah, and a lot of that will come back down to permits and all kinds of stuff.
But what a client, what if somebody gets a permit, puts 6 pillars in, they leave, they take out 2, and now you buy the house?
Again,
So if the permit showed that there were 6 there and 6 there, and then you buy the house, there's only 4, wouldn't that be a claim?
yeah, probably.
Right.
Because you have to start looking at what do the actual permits and
Yeah,
say,
it's,
right?
yes,
Because if the permit tells you that you can do this renovation, but it's gotta be done this way here, it's gotta have 6
Yep.
pillars, and all of a sudden there's only 4 or
yep,
however many there are, then you can look at that and go, okay, well, then there was obviously work done here without the building permit at that point, cause it was closed, signed off, and then you should've got another building permit in order to do
the rest of it,
the rest of it type of thing, right? So,
yeah, okay, good,
so,
he gets it.
but, yeah, so so I'm just gonna finish off with a couple other areas that are very interesting in terms of, some of the coverages to really watch for. One is with property taxes. We actually ensure that property taxes are paid and up to date. Now, your lawyer's still gonna go and they're gonna check and confirm taxes and make sure that they are paid and up to date. But if they're, so here, probably the best way to explain this is through a claim example. So we had a client who, they bought a property, and the property wasn't even a year old, but they bought it as a resale property, which means they didn't buy it from the builder. So the builder built it, sold it to somebody else, and then they came in, but it was less than a year old at that point. And so when they closed the deal, the lawyer checked the taxes. Taxes at the city said, it's fine, everything's paid, it's up to date, all that kind of stuff. They closed. 3 months later, they received a letter from the municipality saying that you now owe for 6 months of property taxes, because they had to do a special assessment because it was a new build. And they did the special assessment, even though the city had already told them that the taxes were fully paid and up to date. They did a special assessment, which was not attached to their report that they had. And even though the lawyer checked the report to make sure that they were paid and up to date, and the city said, yeah, no, they're paid and up to date, they went, yeah, we know that's what that said, but you still owe the taxes, right?
Wow.
So we covered that one, for the client. So that was more like a special assessment that happens on property taxes sometimes. So if you don't know that there's a special assessment, that happens.
Well, wouldn't that be on the lawyer then for not, like it's a year old, is it a new subdivision? All of that information would be.
Yep.
That's why it's there,
But-
lawyers make mistakes.
So, yeah, so lawyers do make mistakes, but in this case here, we knew the lawyer really well. Well, we don't go after your lawyer. So we won't sue a lawyer unless they're being fraudulent themselves, or like so blatantly, willfully negligent that they created the whole issue themselves. Then maybe we'll go after them. But in that case there, the lawyer clearly went to the municipality and said, I need a tax certificate. They issued a tax certificate, but there's no indication of any special assessment at this point. Said the taxes are paid and up to date as of this date here. But there was nothing on the report that indicated that they were doing a special review of the property. Because it was still taxed at a higher amount than, like, cause it was, so for example, so in that case there, the original tax would have been on the vacant land.
Yeah.
Right? But by the time his client purchased it, it was still based on the land plus the house. but they had also done another review of that property at that time. And so that's where it kinda got convoluted, and so the lawyer doesn't catch it. And you talk to most lawyers that go through that whole process of doing a new construction in that kind of scenario, is that first 3 or 4 months of the year can sometimes be really tricky to be able to confirm taxes on a new build. So a lot of times they'll miss that stuff, or the municipality just doesn't report it properly, or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, we definitely have to watch for that. We also had a claim in the tax situation where the lawyer he confirmed taxes with the municipality that they were paid and up to date. And after closing, his client then receives a $5,000 tax bill. That information was not included in the tax assessment that they gave to the lawyer at the time. But you can go back to the municipality and you can say, no, you made the mistake, so I don't know the taxes. You think that they're gonna let that go?
Yeah.
Right. So who's responsible for it? It's the current homeowner of the property. Now, you could say, oh, well, I just bought this house from, John Doe, so now I'm gonna go sue John Doe and try and recoup that loss because they technically own it. Well, if it's a $4,000 or $5,000 tax bill, A, are you gonna be able to get it from them? And B, how much money and time are you gonna take to deal with it and try and track that down? So that's kind of where we come in. Now, if we see that, an opportunity to be able to go after that previous homeowner and say, look, we just paid off this $10,000 tax bill that you owed, so we want our money back.
And they have big corporate
And
lawyers.
so we can go after them.
Yeah, they got the big guns.
Now, sometimes we'll make a decision where we'll just say, you know what, it's not worth our money and time for even us to go after a previous homeowner, because you could just spend all kinds of money and you're never gonna get anything back, right? So that makes it hard, but that's the risk factor that we take. That's why we're an insurance company. We weigh the risks and look at those opportunities.
There'd be some onus on the buyer though, too. If he's buying an $800,000 home and the tax bill's only $1,200, he's gonna say, wait a minute, something wrong here. You know, there's gonna be some onus on the person buying the property, say, this is unreasonable. This tax bill is unreasonable.
Yeah, but usually where we see the errors that are coming in, it's not that, it's not saying, like, so a previous owner may owe $5,000 on the tax bill, so you might get the tax bill receipt, it just says it's paid and up to date, and your tax bill is now $5,000 a year, or whatever it is, right? But what maybe you didn't get on there was that there's arrears on that tax bill. So sometimes it's about the reporting of that from the tax office themselves. So it's not necessarily that the lawyer hasn't looked at that and tried to make sense of it and says, oh, I got an $800,000 house and it's only $800 for the tax bill. That doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't add up. And sometimes, depending on when it happens, it could be $800 because that $800,000 house might have only been taxed for that year on a property that was only worth 40, 50, 60, $100,000, right? Because it was vacant land at that time. And so that's all you owe for, right? Because you paid tax for the full year. So sometimes it just depends.
It takes 2 years for that stuff to catch up too.
Sometimes it takes time for reporting to catch up and that sort of thing. And we also find that, well, I mean, you've heard Leanne talking about how many clients that she's seeing a day and running through that. So all those deals are also going to law firms, and then those lawyers are going through these deals. So I know that a lot of lawyers are busy and they're going through that. And so the one that I gave you earlier as an example where the lawyer had checked the taxes, at first he just paid it himself. He goes, that's my fault. I missed it. I should have caught that. I should have known that that was not properly paid and up to date. And he felt really bad for it. So he just wrote, whatever it was, $3,000 or $5,000 for the check. And so I'm just sitting in his office one day having a conversation with him, listening to his story. And I said, kind of the same thing I said to Leanne. Please tell me that you put title insurance in place on that property. And sure enough, he did. And so we just put the claim through and it got covered off. And we actually paid the lawyer back directly in that case because he was able to show that he wrote the check to.
I didn't know I
pay the
had it
taxes.
though. When I was in the industry, working
Yeah.
as a banker with Manulife Bank,
Yep.
I closed my house with Trevor Hughes.
Yep.
And it was only by the grace of God that Trevor was using title insurance back then, customer and lender policies, that I got covered.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that they have it, but what we're seeing now is that, especially the younger lawyers, you know, the older ones are still a little bit, you know, sometimes they'll still say, well, we title insure when there's a problem. Which, in some ways is good for us, because if you're only title insured when there's a problem, then that means we don't have to actually cover the problem. So they're buying a policy really for no real reason at that point. I mean, there's always a reason, but it's, we're not, you know, covers things like, that we already know about, right? But a lot of the younger lawyers are really now starting to put policies in place on every single transaction that they do. And they're just making it part of their whole process. And it's definitely worth it. Again, it comes back to where we talked about, you know, how can you use title insurance to help you save some money? You don't have to get a survey or location certificate to do the deal, then that's gonna save you, well,
$4,000.
it's already gonna cover you off anyway, really. Even if you're buying a multi-unit property, if you're buying a property that's say 5 or 6 units in it, and you don't have to get a survey or location certificate done for that, I mean, that's already saving you money right off the bat, right from there. There are certain off-title searches that we can say to a lawyer that you don't have to do anymore. So then now they're not charging you for those off-title searches, right? Now, then you come back and you get title insurance, you put that in place, and then it provides even further detailed coverage within that policy. I mean, lawyers are really doing their best out there to make sure that they're covering everything off. What title insurance is an added value type of thing to what they're doing. You know, title insurance, I guess, in some ways, you could refer to it as the belt and suspenders of real estate, right? To make sure that everything is good and clean, and when it's not, it's there to, you know, hold you up, right? Type of thing. So, if you're looking to get title insurance, typically you get it when you purchase your property. You just go to your lawyer, you tell them that you want to get title insurance, preferably from Chicago Title, because we're the best out there. Nobody else.
He is all attest to that.
So just let your lawyer know that you want to get title insurance on your transactions. They know how to get it. They'll order it online through us, because we always require them to do certain searches and go through a certain process in order to get it and provide us with information. So we connect up with them directly to do that. If you already own a property and you'd like to get title insurance on it, then we recommend that you go back to your lawyer again and let them know that you want to get title insurance on that particular piece of property.
Still buy it after.
You can still buy
After.
it, yeah.
Now, if you know shit,
if
you're
you know-
buying
yeah,
it.
yeah. We don't cover you if you already know that there's a problem with the property.
How do you know we know?
Pretend that you didn't know.
That's the balancing act, isn't it, right? We might have a few questions if you buy it today and then you put a claim in tomorrow. We might have a few little questions or concerns
life
about
insurance,
what's
yeah.
going
It's
on.
like buying Apple Care for your phone on day like 17 after everybody smashed the screen.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yes,
That one.
Yes. Yes,
From the time you purchase a home, you get title insurance.
yeah,
How long does that title insurance stay on the property?
that's a really good question. So the lender policies stay there for as long as the loan is in place. The owner policy will stay there for as long as you actually own the property. And if you were to hand it down and keep it within an estate, it will carry on through within the estate as well.
And so if you've had the property for 25 years,
Yeah.
and you put a claim in for structural failures from the previous owner, is that still, is it
Well,
related?
so that's where we get into, is that just normal wear and tear on the property, or is it related to the fact that there was no building permits
Well,
issued
but
to
some
do
things you don't
the
need
work?
building permits for. If it's interior renovations, that should do structural changes.
Right,
to
so if you
building.
don't need a permit for it, then we're not gonna cover
Yeah,
it.
so I mean, you
So
put in a brand new
for
kitchen.
us, it's
you don't
all
need a
related.
permit for a brand new
Right.
kitchen.
Right.
Electrician needs a permit, plumber
Yeah.
needs a permit.
That's right.
But you don't need a permit for the kitchen.
Yeah, typically where you're gonna need a permit for is things that are structural, like
Yeah.
walls, foundational work. Like for example, we had a claim come in where someone's foundation started sinking in a little bit, and we're trying to figure out what was going on, and what turned out was the previous homeowners went into the basement and just cut holes out of the cement to make windows in the basement. Didn't get the permits to actually do it. Now, you can do that, but you need to make sure you have the proper permits and that you do all the proper things in order to do it properly so that the house doesn't fall in on you. But they didn't do that. And so our client bought the property, and because the previous homeowner didn't have the building permits to do that work, that's where we then stepped in to cover that. So typically structural, like you said, anything electrical, plumbing, typically there you need to get building permits. A lot of times, we quite often will see building permits with relation to decking. You know, because if it's over a certain height or a certain size on the deck, then typically you would need to get a building permit with respect to that.
Anything outside your home, you need a permit for.
Pretty much.
Even a shed.
But I mean, you can still build a deck that's like under, I think, typically like under a foot high or something like that, and you don't need a permit.
If it's not attached to the house.
If it's not attached to the house, and, you know, but there's all, you have to really check in with the community as well, within the municipality, because often each municipality might be a little bit different in what they require permits for and what they don't require
So
permits
is
for.
the cost of title insurance based on the age of the home or location?
It's based on the value of the property itself.
Property limit.
Yeah, and so title insurance will actually insure the property up to 200% of the original purchase price.
So if the building burnt down because of a previous owner's faulty electrical?
That's your
system?
house insurance.
That would most likely be your house insurance because it's a fire. Again, ours always has to come back to, was there permits issued or not issued? Because we're more so actually insuring the paperwork. We're not really insuring the work on the property. If it, like I said earlier, like if it's crappy work, unfortunate for you that it was crappy work, but it comes back to the paperwork on that. So if the work that was done needed to have building permits to do it and they didn't get it done, and now you're being forced into a situation where you have to fix or remedy that, then that's where our policy covers.
It is very hard to get the municipality to tell you to remedy your house, just so you're aware, right? I'll give you an example of something, of a way that you can do it with the paperwork, that it will, fall under them, but maybe it's a different way of thinking about it. So I think I talked to you about this one too. It was in Bedford. I had a client buy a house, and when they went into the house, there was a mold smell. And the realtor said, it's the washing machine, it's a front end load, right? So they're like, oh yeah, okay, whatever, we'll get rid of the washing machine. So they get the house, they get rid of the washing machine, and there's still mold smell. So they begin, because it's getting really bad, so they begin ripping up carpet in the basement, and of course they found in the basement there was black mold on the wood, the subfloor, there was a leak, and it was all covered by a basement reno. 5 years ago the house was listed, unfinished basement. They bought it, finished basement. When they went to the municipal office, there were no permits issued. And now they're being forced to rip out their whole basement and start over. Title insurance covered that. So there was no permits issued for it, so it wasn't a paperwork thing, but the MLS from 5 years ago, unfinished, and the MLS 5 years later, finished, that was the kicker for that one. And Cam will help you.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's just gonna be some legwork, sometimes that the homeowner's gonna have to do, just to be able to show us what the whole situation is. Yeah, we just don't have enough people really working for us to go to every single house and to do all that legwork. But again, I mean, if you compare it to say like a car insurance, well, obviously you have to legally have car insurance, but you pay that every single year. There's deductibles that are on it, and so when you look at the cost of us, we know that there is some legwork that's going into place, so we've already considered that within the pricing structure of the title insurance policy in itself.
And do you cover buyers if they're doing like an agreement for sale?
If the buyer is doing an agreement for sale,
Yeah.
no, not,
So if I buy a house from Mark,
yeah,
Mark, needs to move to Vancouver, and I buy a house from him,
yeah,
but he still holds a mortgage, still holds title to the property, but I have legal right to that house because I'm paying this mortgage and paying all utilities.
yeah,
It's an agreement for sale.
yeah.
can I get title insurance on that property?
So you have ownership of the property?
No, he still owns it.
vendor take back.
Yeah, like, vendor take back.
They'll just transfer, title wouldn't transfer.
No, because if he's still the owner, until there's a transfer of the actual ownership of the property, whoever is the actual owner
Yeah.
can only have title insurance on that property.
What about if he's a lender then?
If he's a lender, he can
If
have
he-
title insurance for
if
the
he-
lending
If he was set
component.
up as a private lend,
Yeah, which takes a lot of.
Then you can
Right.
do a private
Yeah,
lending.
it would be a
In
private
that
lend.
instance, then I have ownership of the house. though.
You would have ownership of those at that point.
Yeah, my name owns title of the property.
Yeah, so whoever has title to the property can get a policy for themselves, but then anything else, it's really just lender policies. Yeah.
I've got one weird one for you. So I just recently bought a property and on that property was a spring-fed well that
Okay.
was supplying 5 other properties. The well was on a separate property and had to cross, I was the last one on the line.
Okay,
And that spring-fed well had actually supplied water for the whole community at that point, many, many years ago, and then was just reduced to that last. But anyways, when I went to get the loan, the lender wouldn't allow me to have this, just the spring-fed well unless I had written permission from everyone on the line that I have right to this water.
right,
And 2 of the guys on the line disliked the owner that I was buying from
right,
and refused to sign.
right.
And so then they had to reduce the price to the same value as a drilled well. But if it would have went through
Yeah.
and the lender didn't make that stipulation, and I would have ended up with that, which is still attached to the house currently. I mean, it's over 100 years that's been, and there's no documentation.
It was never deeded, like it was never deeded.
Never.
Yeah,
For
that,
any of the properties?
None. Yeah, and it literally, I mean, they don't own water from the spring, because the spring comes down from the mountain, and it just happens to be on somebody else's property, and then they.
When the lines run across the property, there's gotta be a deed in place.
so,
The first person.
depends on how it's all set up, right? I mean, we can say to a lender, we were talking about this a bit earlier, where we provide coverage over the well, right? But only for the lender, and not for the well that already exists,
Right.
right? Your situation would be a bit interesting, and I'd have to look into it a little further, because what we have to take into consideration at that point is, you know, how long has that been in existence for? Are there any agreements in place? Because you would have to have some kind of a right to have that easement going through
Yeah.
all those other people's properties. So we'd have to dig into it a little bit more and kind of try and figure out, now, if you went into it and you didn't even know that it existed, and you just closed on the deal, maybe there could be coverage. We'd have to figure out how exactly, it's an interesting one, that'd be a little bit, it's not, that one's not as like black and white
Well, my
as,
lawyer said that if we went, that's the thing, that if you would have taken any of them to court, because it had been over 100 years that it had been
yeah,
that way, that they couldn't technically stop you,
yeah. So
but they
it's,
also wouldn't sign off on it, so then that would have bared the cost of going through the process of the courts
Yeah.
and getting
Well,
the legal.
At the end of the day, for your headache free, when you're gonna sell that property, you have a neutral vote.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah,
And it's on
Yeah,
your property,
exactly.
and you're
Yeah.
free and clear, and it's a way better situation for you to
Yeah.
get that drill well taken care of.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
my opinion, just to get
Yeah.
all that community well, you don't have to worry about that on any.
Really good water, though.
yeah.
You can probably sell that shit.
You know, you probably in the same middle vein,
Well,
right?
I don't know,
Yeah,
it's
maybe.
140 feet, which isn't too bad, but I mean.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, you're good, you're good.
But title insurance, did anybody even know that it existed? Right?
I have a little experience with that too, because you know, I've brought quite a number of properties off and on lately, and it
Yeah.
always comes up at my lawyers about title insurance, and my sister is a retired surveyor, and she goes, "You don't need that, we can check it out on our end, just never mind," and she doesn't even charge me, right? But then the lawyer, and I'm like, so what's the difference if we get this? And they say, oh, well, you know, it's $500, you pay it once, if you don't on closing, you only got like a week afterwards, and that's it, you can't buy it after that, that's what I was told. And, yeah, and then, and it only covers, you know, if somebody has a lien on it or an easement, that was basically the short run of what I got for title insurance.
Right.
And I'm like, who needs title insurance?
Well, the good news is you can buy title insurance at any time.
That's good, I heard that.
Now, you may not get the full coverage you would as if you're the current, like if you're just buying today. The big difference, it's funny that you bring that up about the surveyor, because like because that, early on, that was the real big debate, right? It was like, no, don't get title insurance, just go get a survey or location certificate and you're fine.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay to a point, but what does a survey location certificate tell you? It's important information.
Yeah.
And in certain circumstances, you need to actually have it, but it really just tells you the needs and bounds of the property,
Yeah.
right? And then you're done.
Mm.
With title insurance, we'll actually insure you against future encroachments, so if somebody builds onto your property, so we cover for that. Our survey coverage is three-dimensional, it means it goes underground and it goes up in the air, so if there's like roof overhangs or
Okay.
that kind of stuff, so it covers off that for encroachments. But then it takes another change in direction, which is all these other things that we were talking about, right? Like covering over the lack of the building permits, covering over taxes, covering against fraud, covering against unknown, unregistered easements and, you know, right-of-ways that wouldn't have been picked up from a survey. So I'm more of the school where I'm not gonna tell you never ever get a survey done. Always get title insurance on all your transactions, even if you're getting a survey or location certificate at the same time. Get both. I know sometimes the cost may come into play for some people with respect to that, but because we cover so much more than what a survey or location certificate does, I honestly think that if you're buying a property, you really only need to get the location certificate or the survey these days if you're planning on building or doing any renovations to a current structure that's on the property. Because otherwise you already show up and you know where the boundary lines are. Now, if you get into multiple acres of land, then maybe then you might want to be considering getting a survey as well at that time. So there's different circumstances. So I would never tell anybody, don't ever get one. But I would always tell people to always get title insurance on their transaction. And in those cases, you just may not need to get a survey or a location certificate, so it all
It's
depends.
worth every penny.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
With
Yeah.
commercial property, with commercial property, you get environmental phase one, surveys done. On residential properties, if you have title insurance, and then you found out that there was a buried oil tank on your property that was creating environmental issues, do you
Yeah.
cover that too?
So typically we don't cover anything that's environmentally related. However, I have seen some coverages where, like we had a client, this was up in the North Sydney area, where the
Tar
homeowner, tar ponds, where the homeowner actually found out that there was an oil tank from an old gas station that was encroaching onto their property, and we paid for the removal of that, because it was encroaching onto their land. So not because it was an environmental issue, right? So if there was an oil tank that wasn't encroaching onto their land, that was there, and oil seeped over, it's not coverage on our end, right? Or vice versa, if it was a buried oil tank on your property that was supposed to be part of your property and leaked out somewhere else, we don't cover that. But in this case here, we were able to show that there was encroachment of the oil tank onto our client's property, so we paid for the removal of it. Fortunately, there was no leakage. Otherwise,
So, but
that'd be
if,
nasty.
if it would have, if they would have had it, are you saying that if it would have been on the neighbor's land and it leaked onto their land, you wouldn't have covered it?
If it was
Because you would have gone back after.
we
that.
only covered it because it was an encroachment issue.
Okay,
That was the only reason why we covered it.
okay.
It had nothing to do with the fact,
Yeah.
it could have been anything.
The tank itself was your property line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it really could have been anything that was buried underneath of there, whether it was an oil tank, a septic system, and well, whatever, right? It wouldn't have mattered what it was. If it's underground and it's encroaching onto your property, then it can get covered off. Yeah,
In Nova Scotia, you have your land titles, you have title to your
Yeah.
property.
yeah,
And you put, or you did some work in my house and you put a $20,000 lien on my property.
yeah.
The only people that get notice of that lien is the people on title to the property, right?
The only people that get notice?
Yeah, like-
Yeah,
yeah,
because they're
like-
the only one that would have any,
Yeah, like the lenders of the property don't get notice of this.
they're not gonna get notification of it.
No. I know there's a lot of difference between Alberta and Nova Scotia, a lot of difference in the way things run and the way
Yeah.
things are set up.
Yeah.
And then all we do, on the agreement for sale, I put my name on Mark's, not on the mortgage, but it can be set up so he will be the only one that will get notice that we had an agreement, not the bank, so.
Those are joint ventures and all that stuff, and, yeah.
No, it's not joint ventures, it's
No?
something different than a joint venture, but.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, yeah.
Any other questions?
Questions?
Dana? So I've told this girl she likely has a title claim.
Well, and I actually got the guys from, I had a sweet talk them a couple of times to finally come over. But
She
I
works
got
for
guys-
MCAP as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I got one of the guys from the city to come over and he went through our entire house
Yeah.
and he says there's nothing that has to be done because there was never any permits except for a fence that they put on.
Okay,
Everything in the inside of the house, there was never any permits.
okay,
And his response, so this is just the starting point, his response was, we don't know when the work was done and the permits requirement is constantly changing as we keep going. So as an example, after you said that, I sent my girlfriend I sent Tammy a message, send me all the MLS listings, because my basement is finished, but we had to put some new wiring in, and when we opened it up, it looks like there's asbestos around some of our pipes.
right,
Which as long as you don't touch it,
Disturb
then-
it, yeah.
right?
yeah,
But technically, now if they knew about it and they built around it, do we have a claim on that side? That's one of many layers. I have a
Mhm.
beam going across for a support beam
yeah,
that there's no permits for that, but they took out walls, so I don't know if it's like what it's from, so that,
yeah,
and they're saying, well, we don't know if they did it or when they did it.
right,
The municipality never wants to tell you to
Yeah.
fix something because it makes them liable.
But there is something that's gone on lately that I didn't realize there's two connections, is he put the kitchen into the extension, right? And he did
Okay.
his own plumbing from that kitchen.
yeah,
He dug up the front of the house.
yeah,
But attached, and when I talked to the guys and I talked to the municipality sewer lines, he attached the plumbing from the kitchen onto our main line going out, but it was still on the property. Got no permits or anything,
yeah,
but where it gets interesting is when he put that plumbing in, he pulled the spikes out that identify where the lines are, which is illegal, and didn't put it back in. So I'm thinking that might actually be where they do the surveys to put them back in, might be able to go back on that side, which opens up the can of worms of, like, the plumbing he put in is not graded properly, so if I wanna put a bathroom or anything in,
mhm,
I have to tear the whole thing out and start again.
right,
And, yeah, so anybody I got lists, there's so many lists. But,
So could
Yes.
the former MLS and the current MLS with the work being done and no permits, could that help her?
this might be a
I
question.
mean, it's definitely not gonna hurt.
Okay,
Um,
get those
Start.
papers, yeah.
So, when someone thinks that they have a claim,
Yeah.
what I always encourage them to do is submit your claim. I always suggest email it in, that way there you have record of when you sent it in, that's always the best way to do it.
Yeah.
The other thing about doing it that way is, I also suggest put as much detail about it as you possibly can, including your MLS listings, any old information that you have on the property, old MLS listings, put in your purchase and sale agreement, put in, you know, whatever
They signed the
documentation.
agreement that they actually did all the work.
Include
That's-
the purchase and sale agreement,
Yeah.
like everything,
Yeah,
like
everything.
include everything. Because you can't possibly give us too much information.
Yeah.
Cause we might get the claim come in, we'll look at it, go, well, based on this information, no, there wouldn't be a
Anything.
claim here, so we don't
With them, more is better.
So more is
With
better.
the lenders, less is more.
Mhm.
Noted.
Right,
Yeah.
so the more detail that you can provide us, then the underwriters can start looking at that. We do actually review the policy to try and find out where would that fit into the coverage of the policy with all the information that you are actually providing. So it's a matter of sorting that out, right? I mean, it's insurance, nothing is ever gonna be
Simple and easy.
black and white, like there's a lot of gray, there's a lot of red, there's a lot of blue, you know, like there's so many different moving parts to it that we have to just kind of go through it and sort of figure out, is this coverage? Again, so the three things that we always look for is, A, is it covered underneath of our policy? B, is the client in a situation of loss, like financial loss, whether that's paying legal fees or loss in value of the property or what have you? And C, the third thing that we're looking for is, are they being forced to fix or remedy the situation?
Yeah.
Now, often the municipality coming back to you and giving you notice that, you know, building permits were
I
issued
tried.
or
I
something
was-
like that.
Find something.
That's always the easiest thing to do. And sometimes there may not be anything for us to do. We might look at something and go, okay, well, potentially there could be coverage here, but because you're not incurring a loss, so maybe we figured out that your deck was put on without the proper building permits,
Yeah.
okay? It's in fantastic shape, it's not going anywhere, it's not falling apart, but then the city's not coming back to you and forcing you to remove it. So we're just gonna look at that and go, okay, well, we'll make note of it, that it's there, until it becomes a problem where you're forced to fix it. There's really no sense of loss here going on. So that's just kind of
Oh,
an
no, the
example,
deck's,
but.
the deck's crap too, it's just, it's.
All
it's
decks
a,
are
like,
crap anyway, but
list.
yes.
No, no,
It's
yeah, yeah,
poison,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, so it's just a matter, but how we look at that, like, are you actually, because we have to be able to say yes to all of those questions, and if we can't say yes to all of them,
Yeah.
then there's no coverage. We
So-
wouldn't- That doesn't mean we wouldn't pay it out either, though, in the future,
Yeah.
because things change, or we get more information, or what have you.
So as an example, my back deck wasn't flashed properly, so the entire back of my house was mold. We took the window out, we found, so went to Cameron, we figured it all out. And my
I don't
front
even-
deck wasn't that much different.
Right.
My
I don't
front
even
deck,
think your front deck was attached to the house, was it?
well, it was, but it was 2 pieces of 2x4 nailed together inside
Right.
plastic into the ground. No cement, no nothing, but the deck wasn't falling off, right? The rails were a little bit too low, but they were appropriate for the time that they were put in.
Right.
So there was
That's
no
my problem.
claim to have there. Now, Cam told me if I went to sell my house and somebody came in and said, that deck, the way that's built, if they picked it up or whatever, then potentially that was a claim. If you're selling it and you have to fix something that was done incorrectly by the former owner.
Maybe,
Maybe.
again, it's gotta get all attached to the permits and stuff like that,
Yeah,
right? So,
Yeah, so like my back deck was covered, but my front one, we ran into walls, which the back deck was great, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, my claim was like $22,000.
so, but even in a situation like yours that you're painting right now, it may be a situation where maybe we don't cover everything. Like in Leanne's situation, we didn't cover everything,
No,
but we covered quite a bit.
cause we had started
And
fixing
so-
some stuff, right?
Even if you've got 50% covered of what your issue is, that's better than,
Even my
nothing,
back
right?
deck
So-
is, it's a 3 foot high, and it's posts, and they've got these straps holding the upper posts, it's not
Yeah.
properly done.
yeah.
And you kinda lean, all of a sudden, the whole thing is kinda, don't lean there, please don't lean there.
So I have another friend, her daughter bought a house, just last year out in Rawdon, and it was lipstick and mascara, and they fell through the kitchen floor. That's how improperly it was done. Now, they inherited money and they bought another house, but they were starting a title insurance claim, and the fucking thing burned.
That was the one that,
Yep, right, like, I mean, you can't, anyway.
So just remember, sometimes we don't always necessarily need the letters or the permits from the municipality, but you have to be in a situation where you're being forced to fix it, right? So something's falling apart or,
yeah.
you know.
Like if the
whatever.
municipality had went into my girlfriend's house in Falmouth, and they walked in and they're trying to put this new furnace in, getting a permit, and they're going 1, 2, 3, 4, there should be 6, you have to do that? They would, yeah.
So that's where we get in to encourage the homeowners to share information
much.
with us as much as we possibly can, so we can paint a full picture together to kind of figure out
Yeah.
what's really going on.
Yeah, and there's so much going on, and even I started talking to the city, and they're like, the only thing we've ever received for permits is to put a separation,
Yeah.
fence.
Sorry.
Privacy
I don't
fence.
Like
know.
we had there was a client up in Quebec years and years ago, and in the winter,
Mm.
part of the roof collapsed in on
Well, that's another
due-
thing.
due to the weight of the
My
snow,
roof was
right?
curved.
Yeah.
And so builder goes up, tries to figure, or the homeowner's like trying to figure out what the heck happened, and so he makes a claim to us, and what we found out was that the previous homeowner, who worked for a hockey stick manufacturer, used the hockey stick handles to make his roof trusses.
Nice.
So clearly in that situation, we didn't come back to him and say, can you go get a letter from the municipality saying that you didn't have,
Yeah.
like, cause now you know, right? Obviously, everybody knows,
Sherwood's
Right?
strong, but not that
they're,
strong.
they're strong, but
Yeah.
I don't know if it was
Right?
wood or if it was graphite or
Yeah.
composite or whatever some of these sticks are now that just kind of break apart on you sometimes.
Yeah.
and you-
Well, Cameron, how does it work when you buy a property that's listed as is, where is?
That was my question.
That means that you're assuming the responsibility of everything that's done.
That part it doesn't really matter to us, it's more of a matter of what you know though, right? So if you're buying a property and you know that a certain renovation was done without the proper building permits, and you're already agreeing to buy the house despite all of that, then that's on you, right? So if you know that, then that's,
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well-
even if you get a home inspection done,
Mhm.
he doesn't look for permits.
You can't see in the walls, can't see,
Right.
right?
No, he doesn't look for permits,
right.
he just is.
Right, so if you're buying a house where it is as is and all that kind of stuff, and there is an issue there, but you don't know about it, then,
Potentially you're covered.
then that,
Interesting.
And we even advise people, even a brand new home,
Yep.
get an inspection done.
My house was 6 years old.
No, but I mean a brand new one, get an inspection done,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
home inspection done.
Because the brand new ones aren't finished.
Yeah, but the other thing too is sewage line. It can be plugged with debris, coffee cups, whatever left over from construction.
Yep.
You get that home inspection done and that sewer check, or that sewer line check.
Yep.
see, in an ideal situation, when you're buying a house, if you get a building inspection done, you get a survey done, and you get title insurance done, now you're really starting to cross all those Ts and dot all those Is, and you're really doing your due diligence.
And then
Where-
something comes up.
Right.
You're
But
covered.
where it then comes in, but where it really comes into play though is people are now buying houses without the inspections, right? I mean, we
They're
saw-
not making it a condition at all,
They're
no
not making it a
financing,
condition at all, right?
no inspection, they're taking it as is, yep.
And but the other example,
Yeah.
but even with the house that I told you earlier with the furnace situation, they had a full inspection done on the property. But the inspector would never have known,
You don't think to look in the walls for a capped furnace.
he wouldn't have looked for a capped furnace,
No.
right? Because the vents would have been covered over from ceilings and from walls, so unless you
But he would
have a homeowner who agrees that, oh yeah, go ahead, punch holes in my walls.
Yeah.
No,
all that
but
stuff.
he should be cranking the heat up and checking for airflow.
Maybe,
That's what inspectors should do, a
Take-
good inspector.
yeah.
There we go.
Check
That's,
each-
A good
the
inspection.
key right there.
Good.
Yeah.
Now, that's actually a really good question, because we bought a house about 4 years ago, oh my gosh, 5 years ago. But it's right on Garish, and it was an as-is, but it was taken back by the bank. So we
Okay.
bought it as-is, we got the inspection, we did get the title insurance, and after our tenants moved in, about 6 months after, we had one of those really nasty rainstorms.
Yeah.
And the side flooded
Yeah.
because they did an extension that wasn't properly framed, it wasn't done right, like we started getting rats coming through, like there
Yeah.
was all these problems.
Yeah,
And I thought cause I got as is where is, but I never knew of any of them, but they said they take no ownership on anything on that house, cause it's as is where
who
is.
does it?
The bank,
Or the bank?
yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm like, I don't think I have anything on there, but
Yeah.
who do you go after, cause it was a foreclosure?
Yeah.
Like who's responsible, like I'm pretty much,
I'm wondering about.
I gotta tear down that
Asbestos
book.
in an as-is, where is from the bank too, like,
Yeah.
we're
Do
responsible.
do I have
10
an
years after
opportunity
they
to?
buy it?
Cause I don't think that thing was done to code, it was horrible.
Well, I mean, the thing to remember though, it's not about whether it was done to code,
Right.
or not done the code.
Permit was signed
It's whether or
off.
not the permits were, because
Yeah,
someone could sign off on those permits and it wasn't done to code,
right.
right? But then if that's happening, then that's a completely different,
If there was
That's
no
where-
inspection whatsoever,
yeah, because the permits are already signed off and they're,
like this was an add-on to the back of their
Yeah,
house, so you'd think they would have to have something, but.
yeah, so if you do some research on that, you find out that there was that work that was done, there was no permits that were issued to do it, you know, you might have to do a little bit of background checking first on it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't certainly discourage you from at least putting the claim in, right? Cause you'll never know unless you ask about it, right?
But when you do a survey report on your property,
Yeah.
that property in particular, the surveyor lays out the house and land too, right?
Yeah.
And he would lay out the addition on it, and would he check with county for the plans of the house?
Most times they,
And then he would not realize.
depends on
that-
how detailed of a survey you're
If-
really
Yeah,
getting,
if there
right?
was no permit for that
Yeah.
addition, it would show up as being
Yeah.
not part of the house.
right,
But
but I have to go looking up to the city and see what they have listed there.
Yes.
should be plans.
I mean, the city's really ultimately gonna tell you whether or not there was permits that were issued to do any work, right? And then the next step in that is find out, was there work done to it that needed those permits?
That actually brings up another good point of that house. I'm sorry, I'm stealing all the time.
That's okay, that's,
It's
we
a
all
good
learn
discussion,
from
is
this
what it's
stuff,
all about.
yeah.
So the back of the house is a massive 20-foot wall.
Okay.
And when they sold me the house, they said that is the responsibility of the municipality to maintain that wall.
Like a retaining wall?
Big massive retaining wall, like I'm on Garish, what's the one behind it?
Wiley?
No, all the way up.
Okay.
King.
Okay.
King's backyards come up to the deck and if
Yeah.
they fall, they could break their legs.
Right.
I don't know who's responsible about that, I was told it was the municipality, but then I found out from the next door neighbor who is the
Neighbors
guy.
are wonderful.
And they said, no, that's your responsibility, so remember we had that massive flood and it was like that instant rain flood?
Yeah.
That,
2017.
well, no, the one, they're even more
Oh,
recent
the recent one?
Yeah, like they gushed water over the side and into my basement and like the kids are playing in the pools of water.
So typically, so fences are never covered, retaining walls are often not covered,
Okay.
but it depends on the situation. Retaining walls are a very gray kind of area because it's more of a matter of how does it impact the structure, is it attached to structures? You know, like there's a lot, can you consider it a structure, like,
Yeah.
you know, so
My issue is that
if
the,
it's holding back a
agent.
mountain of stuff, maybe it is considered that, right? But
Yeah.
it becomes very, now, if it's an age thing, because it's getting old and worn out, unfortunately, we don't cover that,
But
right?
the agent who sold me the house said that was responsibility of the city.
You can't believe agents.
Was it in
Oh, I
writing? One sitting right there.
I know, it's just, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
then who becomes responsible, because even the lawyer never commented about anything, why would they? But I'm just curious of what happens to that ownership, right?
You probably had to find out who actually put it up.
Well, it's across all the back of them, it's
Mhm.
the
Oh, it's
literal,
to the number
like,
of different houses.
oh yeah, like it's all the way across.
It's likely the original developer that
That's what I
Maybe.
said.
put them all up, right? And then you become a
That's
homeowner,
only
you
the
become
structure of
responsible
the
for
house
that
is
one
on
little.
the
Unless there's actually
Yeah.
specifics in the,
Nope.
when he,
I didn't even
Have to
know.
see
what
it.
when he
we're talking
developed
about.
it,
Maybe we
Yeah.
should
there was
see
a
the
condition of the
Check
development.
on it,
Yeah.
but it's not the city's problem.
They took
Like, what are
over
you talking
ownership.
about?
Yeah,
I
that-
Which is a
for 5
possibility,
years.
I am one.
I mean, often you see
Because
development,
this end of Gary.
covenants
Or no, you're down
as I
towards.
go in
So
my
your
house,
words
So
right
there's
up to come to
covenants
the
and stuff.
tip,
They don't usually
I'm
need
right
a whole
across from
lot.
the
After
community
a few
center.
years.
Yeah, the-
Who's the guy?
You'll be
Is
able
it
to find that one
right
in the
beside the road,
document
isn't it?
somewhere if there
Yeah,
was.
mine's mint green.
Okay.
Or should be able to find it, but.
And we've done so much really nice work, it looks so good and I'm
Yeah,
loving it.
I'm not sure about the retaining wall one, I couldn't sit there and say, yeah, for sure on that one, it's,
Yeah.
I will tell you, he will.
yeah.
Sorry, Cam.
Chat with your agent too, because they'll be able to check and see if there's any restrictive covenants from the neighborhood, from the original development. It all shows up in property online. So if that's there, then it will say, like, if there were restrictive covenants, it'll say, you know, retaining wall to be property of the town, or
Yeah.
you're not allowed to maintain this, or you have to maintain this, and this is
Yeah.
your section, and you're responsible for it.
Worst case scenario, you'll find out exactly who's responsible for it.
Exactly.
If
If,
you, then
if they
no.
were already ever covenants built, I mean, we're going back.
More
like
info, more
140.
info, more info.
Yeah,
Yeah.
120, 130
My,
years old.
my girlfriend that just submitted hers, literally did a FOIA pop, got all of the documents from the municipality and literally cataloged like 93 pages, table of contents,
Yeah.
live links, everything.
Yeah, and the city, with it being right on Garish down at the end, they probably have most of it. So check in with the municipal at Morris of
Yeah.
I was just wondering if it like part of the development agreement when the developers
That's-
put it there.
That's where the.
Yeah, cause it's
restricted
literally
covenants come in.
holding those houses
Yeah,
up. I
yeah.
mean, the thing is massive, it's like
Oh, it's huge.
2-3 feet,
Yeah.
it's high, like you, if you're driving by,
Yeah.
you can see it behind the houses.
So if it's holding the houses up behind you,
Pretty much,
is
it's
that
like,
your responsibility or their responsibility? Because that's the other question,
and I
And that's
haven't
your
looked at
property.
it,
right?
like I think there's like a metal.
We've had
fencing.
sinkholes down here.
Yeah, I know.
Those are not covered by title insurance, by the way.
Because there's like a 6-foot backyard, and that's it, and then you have this monster retaining wall.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, mine is probably, oh,
10 or
it's
12
20,
feet.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's 20, about
20?
20,
Okay.
there's a shed back there too.
okay, yeah.
It's
I would
decent.
I'd find that information out
Yeah.
first. And then
Oh,
there's
just
always a
nice.
possibility, so, so for example, if the retaining wall is there holding up those houses, then there's a possibility that it could be covered. Whereas if it's a retaining wall that is just there because you have a really nice
Decorative.
garden in your backyard,
No,
No,
it's
it's
not
definitely
really-
not,
no,
like
it's-
it's
it's not,
wide,
yeah,
Yeah,
it has those
King is
here.
angled pillar, like
Garish
the,
is here.
yeah.
yeah, it's like the, you know, those.
A person probably did not pay to put that in.
No,
It's probably put in
it's,
by-
it
Yeah.
has like bridge supports where it's on the angle,
Yeah.
keeping it up.
But, and then keep in mind though, like, if you go through it all and you find out all the proper documentation and permits and all that kind of stuff are there, and if it's just wear and tear and it's just getting old and ready to come down,
You're fine.
likely it's not covered from us.
I don't like.
You have to dig, you have to look, so here's the
I'd rather
one
deal
thing
with
that
it
I will
now.
tell
Yeah.
everybody in this room about this stuff. People give up before they even get started. So the young girl whose house burned out in Rawdon, her mother told her about it, cause I had told her mother, said that's probably covered under title insurance. Sounds like it was a lipstick and mascara kind of thing, it fell through the kitchen floor. She called me and just did a 5-minute call and was like, yeah, okay, whatever. Because they had plans to just go and fix and buy their other place or whatever. And in their case, it didn't burn to the ground, but it burned. But I don't think she was gonna go, it's work. It is work, it's time
Yep.
to get the information. But to me, with what happened with my house, the 8 hours that I took gathering paperwork, going to the municipal office, getting the guys in, doing whatever, $22,000. That was worth my time, right? And especially to make sure that my house was not gonna be a health hazard. Cause we had mold like that was like coming off the house, it was white, like it was crazy, right? So, thank you, Cam. What I'm doing now is I'm gonna get her
Thank
to turn
you.
off the camera.